So this second panel is intended to take a deeper look at other issues, including cyber attacks, from infrastructure to social media, the solutions for best security tactics to protect from cyber attacks, and what you need to know. So we have three really great panelists here to share their insights. So let me bring up here Kozak, president of Franco. Hafiz Malik, who is the associate professor at University of Michigan-Dearborn, and Sayre, who is vice president technology of Bedrock, Detroit. So round of applause. So I think it's helpful so people know why you're up here on this panel and what's your area of expertise and so forth on this. So Tina, why don't you start us off? Tell us a little bit about your quick thumbnail career and what Franco does.
Yes, good morning. So Franco is a full-service communications agency. We're down in the Renton and celebrating our 55th year this year. I specifically work on a lot of crisis, reputation impacting type work, usually kind of at that strategic level, ideally ahead of time, but oftentimes called in, when something's on fire or about to be. So, and I think we're going to talk a lot about operations up here on the cyber side. But usually I'm working on the reputation aspect of an operational risk.
The communication side.
The communication side, the reputation side.
Mm-hmm.
Hafiz, good morning. I'm Hafiz Malik from University of Michigan-Dearborn. I'm the founder of Information Systems Security and Forensics Lab. The main work that we do is basically finding the vulnerabilities in a lot of products that basically in the common workplace and people are using, such as smart speakers, etc. And we identify vulnerabilities, reach out to the basically stakeholders like manufacturers, etc. And then basically propose countermeasures. How can we protect those devices, those products against various attacks, and also work with the automotive industry quite aggressively developing automotive cybersecurity solutions in this space. So been working here at University of Michigan-Dearborn for the last 10 years or so and developed quite a few solutions, and in the upcoming vehicles, self-driving vehicle that everybody is waiting, some of our lab developed solutions will be in those like vehicles as well. So I'll talk about more during the discussion.
Good morning, my name is Sayre. I work for Bedrock in Detroit. Bedrock is one of the Quicken Loans family of companies. We have about 100 buildings in Detroit, a few more in Cleveland. I own the IT infrastructure, operations, and information security. Prior to coming to Bedrock, where I've been for about a year, I worked in the automotive finance industry, where I worked for a company that was the largest consumer in the world of credit reports from TransUnion, in the top 5 for the other 2 credit bureaus. So very, very highly compliant. We also integrated with some of the largest banks in the world, Chase, PNC, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. So very, very compliant. I'm pretty sure we were pretty much in an audit at any point in time. So very much used to regulations and the different policies and procedures that are required for information security. And look forward to talking to you.
So let's talk a little bit about cyber attacks and kinds of things here. And Rob, let me start with you. Any local examples of things that was reported that you can talk about and your thoughts about what they did right or didn't do right in this?
Yeah, absolutely. So many of you may have heard about Blue Cross Blue Shield. Basically, they had data that was at risk due to one of their partners. So what it comes down to is you're as secure as your weakest link. And the industry is moving where you have a lot more integrations. Everybody wants to integrate with everyone else. But if I have Fort Knox, right, and I spend $1 billion in my security, but I'm connected to someone that has the door wide open, then I'm only that secure. So really understanding your partner's security is as important as understanding your own. So things like asking them for SOC reports and really making sure you're doing that onboarding due diligence and that it includes security. Another place that I'm seeing this a lot with some different breaches has been with companies like Equifax that grew. They were buying and purchasing other companies, and they were adding them and going, hey, we have this other new company, let's just add them to our network. Well, they didn't do their due diligence, and now they've again opened up this hole into their network that made them less secure and vulnerable, and there goes 470 million records. So making sure you understand that and having that process and procedure in place, things like third-party risk assessments, Things are called 3PISQ, which is a third-party information security questionnaire. So if it's even a small company and they don't have a SOC type 2 or any of those more mature reporting, make sure you have something where you're asking those questions regarding security before you start sharing your data with them.
Malik, any examples that you want to share with us?
Yes, I guess everybody is familiar with like remote check deposit. How many of you guys have like basically deposited check using your apps? And when it came in 2012, I remember correctly, the day I came to know, I was just like with other researchers, because we are not like a company, we are academia, so we do like a more open-minded kind of research. So at that time, like I pick a phone and call one of colleague in Chicago, and we're talking about, hey, I mean, I don't think so. They put in place the proper checks and balances, and said, if they don't, let's try. So that's what we did. We basically put in place our plan to inject fake checks into the top 3 US banks, and lo and behold, we were like successfully able to basically penetrate in the system. It's like different kind of vulnerability. It's not like basically IT security issue. It is basically the system that you develop. It allows data come through a proper channel, but the thing is, you did not look at like, okay, what capability a user have. Because now, imagine the system now is totally different. Previously, when you go to the bank, you have a teller. So teller is a trusted authority for that bank. Now you are a teller. You understand? Attacker is a teller. So attacker basically have owned the device. Attacker can just like basically modify the software, modify the app, and then inject a fake check. And we like actually demonstrated. We didn't go public at that time. We reach out to the basically in an ethical way. We reach out to all the targeted banks. We did not hurt any public. We basically use our, like basically my account and my, collaborators account and all those kind of things. And then we reach out to them and said, hey, this is the problem. They agree, yes, this is the problem. And then basically come up with a solution and all those kind of things. So that's one example. And there are like more examples such as everybody is using Alexa and Google Home and all those kind of things. And we know that, their penetration in our daily life is growing. And I don't see any end in sight, but the thing is, they are vulnerable to various attacks. We came up with like what are the attacks that we can like basically develop on those for those devices. And on November 4th, just like this week, University of Michigan and Arbor group of researchers, they came up with different attack vector to attack any MEMS-based devices. Okay, so it's basically all the Google Home, Alexa, your cell phone, all these devices can be attacked through laser. So there's nobody talking, but you can just like do that transaction online, you can purchase, you can basically, if it is connected, because now all of you guys probably know that, now like, voice is being used more aggressively towards authentication, like verification purpose. Okay, and as we are moving in that space, on the other side, as AI is growing, I can generate anybody's voice, including mine in this room, without you speaking a word. And there's going to be exact replica of you. So that's real fake news.
Those are real, real examples.
Okay, real examples. So we have generated in our lab like AI generated voice, and those voices can be injected into those systems without any problem. Okay, and I don't need to be in front of the device. Now remotely we can inject into those voices and system won't be able to identify, and here we go. Like identification is done without that person's presence. Ford Motor Company came, like I came to know, like they are working on, like I'm not putting their name here, but other OEMs and other like suppliers are also working on that space to like develop voice-based biometrics in their vehicles, in future vehicles. They're using cameras also, but they are using this one also. So, like I'm already working with other OEMs, including Ford, so we reach out to them and say, you are using the speaker verification system. Do you know these attack vectors that we have developed? I said, we are not aware of those, come to our lab and we demonstrate it.
And you can develop it here.
Exactly.
You're doing many great things there in Ann Arbor here, but I want to hear too from Tina a little bit about some examples here.
Sure, yeah. Well, I think one that is not as local, but it's one as consumers we all are familiar with is the Target data breach, and their whole system went down, and which then very quickly escalated into kind of a viral social media situation from people who were in the lines at Target trying to check out, and instantly that became news, and it wasn't news that was generated by Target in a controlled way. It's just a consumer who's being impacted. So that's one that not quite as local, but certainly widespread.
Affected a lot of people.
And I think they did a really nice job just from a pure customer service standpoint of like passing out snacks in the line and like doing things to those consumers who were being affected, not to mention the millions of others whose data was breached, but in the moment we're doing things to kind of protect and serve their reputation beyond operationally fixing the problem.
Yeah, and Rob, your background too with the auto finance side of things, where you're also very involved with it. And do you think, are most small and medium-sized companies thinking about these sort of data breaches, the cybersecurity thing? I mean, is this something on most people's radar, or is it something, until your company's been hacked, your data's been breached, suddenly they're doing this?
Yeah, I think it's starting to be. I mean, it's in the news so much every day now that it's hard to kind of ignore and act like it's not happening. I think the challenge is really, one side is that the information security workforce is getting so tight. It's just hard to find those amazing talent. I mean, they're all unicorns now, we say. So it's kind of understanding the different options that are out there for smaller companies like MSSP, which is a managed security solution provider, or MDR, which is managed detection and response provider. They can partner with and provide those services. They can also help you develop those policies, which are so important, so that you have that in place. And when people look at things like cyber insurance, one thing you have to understand is it's like any other insurance. If you aren't doing the things that you have to do, they're not going to pay your claim. So if you just, again, have that door wide open and you let everybody come into your network, and you get hacked and you go, okay, well, I need to get my money back, they're gonna say, no, that you weren't doing what you were supposed to do. So it's so important to understand that that side has to be covered if you think you're gonna be covered for that liability.
Tina, you're shaking your head.
Well, I think to the point about the preparation and the employees, in many cases, your workforce being your vulnerability, and so the importance of training them. And this goes, outside of my communications PR experience, but then as a business owner of a relatively small firm, and to your question about how are you preparing. So we are testing our employees and trying to trip them up all of the time with those, different detection kind of technologies and campaigns. And I think what started as a real nuisance for people, like, oh, another training we have to take, and now they're all like really taking pride in not getting tricked. And it's making us all so much smarter and just better prepared and protected.
One cool thing that we did. So at my previous company, we would do the trainings, and I mean, I almost even hated them, and I was the one doing them. It was just they're so boring, right? So what we did is we kind of changed it, and we said we're going to do a training on how to secure your home network, right? And if you think about change management and how people's thought processes with change, and everybody hates change, but if you make it about what's in it for me, right? And then it was standing room only in this training all of a sudden, because they could ask questions about like, what router should I get, and what about my kids? How do I protect them from getting to these sites? And really what we were also doing, because they had all laptops, it was protecting that network where they were taking a company laptop home to a network anyway. So it was really a win-win. And then we were still hitting on the phishing and all the stuff that we still wanted to cover anyway. So it was everybody won, but they actually wanted to go to it and they actually enjoyed it.
Do you think, Malik, since you are a professor, you're teaching young people, and let's be honest, when it comes to technology, we know most young people know more about it than older people, it's just that simple. And are young people and young entrepreneurs, are they more clued into this sort of thing, and is the learning curve to understand more for maybe higher end millennials, boomers, age sort of thing? Do you see that?
I see this trend basically, youth is more like basically, you can say, into the cybersecurity thing. They want to basically do these cool kind of things. So basically, I run at Michigan-Dearborn summer program. In that, like local high school kids, I invite to my lab 8 weeks. It's free. University of Michigan, Dearborn sponsor that thing, and they spend like roughly 8 to 10 weeks in my lab and learn about like how you can hack a car, how you can get into these things. And there are many other programs that we are like a lot of like including my like other people and the UM Dearborn and the UM Ann Arbor, that basically cyber auto challenge, cyber truck challenge. Youth is like more and more involved in these kind of activities, and they really want to basically learn more about like cybersecurity. So the thing is, we are mindful of the fact that there is like a serious shortage of professional in the field of cybersecurity, but eventually we'll get there and we'll meet those needs. And youth is definitely way ahead of us on that side.
So Rob, let me paint a scenario here. Let's say I have a small business. I started 10 years ago. I have 10 employees now, and I'm hearing all these things about this, protecting my data, keeping my employees' data safe, etc. What sort of general things would you tell somebody if they don't have already a comprehensive plan in place? What are the starting points of these are the 3 areas that I would look at to try to make sure that I'm safeguarding my business, myself, my employees?
Yep. So obviously you have your employees, so you look at the training and stuff, like Tina mentioned, right? So making sure that they understand the risks, even like the earlier panel said, if someone calls from a PR standpoint even. The other one is the data. What is your data risk? Understanding what am I protecting? If I was hacked today, what is my worst case scenario that they're going to get? And then that leads into those policies and procedures which you have to have so that you know what steps I need to do then to protect that data. And when the business, a lot of times we go to the CEO and we're always asking, we're IT, we're always asking for money. We love money for expensive, cool toys. But when you look at things and go, okay, everyone walks out of this room right now and you get the call and you've been breached, right? It's that worst case scenario. What would you have done differently, right? Would you have agreed that maybe we needed to do things differently? So having that mindset of that worst case scenario and then working backwards is a hell of a lot better than starting with the breach and going, okay, well, from now on, we're going to do this. And it's the reputational risk, it's already all gone.
And Tina, your company, I know, deals a lot with PR, but there's other things. With this whole cybersecurity realm, what are you hearing more from people when I say people, I mean businesses, when they're coming to you, or organizations maybe that you're also helping with? What kinds of things are they looking for assistance with in the cybersecurity protective realm?
Well, in some ways, it's that crisis planning, and it's beyond just the crisis plan for some of the things that the earlier panel talked about, workplace hazard or work stoppage, and product recalls and things that we handled on the crisis communication side in the past. But now we're kind of adding those layers of how do we communicate when there's a data breach or an employee has taken information, and even corporate cyberbullying, which I think a couple of years ago didn't know was a thing. But so just looking at how being exposed on the data side can really impact a reputation. And then so we're being engaged to put plans together and then really to drill. So much like Malik, you described on the going in and drilling and finding those vulnerabilities, we're coming in on the communication side and not just building the plan, but putting them through the drills and the plans and the tests. And one thing you'd be surprised when we're talking about potential systems down. Like, do you have a hard copy of your crisis plan printed somewhere? Because who keeps hard copy books anymore? But you better have a paper plan if you're all of a sudden you've been ransomed and you have no access to your system. So even those kinds of things and testing, and then a lot of it falls back to kind of that traditional crisis communication. But there's definitely the layer of when it comes to data and being prepared for these new scenarios.
What advice do each of you have to share with someone about learning more about cyber attacks in terms of security measures they can put in place or should be thinking about? What advice do you have about that?
So if you're looking at, again, getting any type like an SSAE 18, right, they'll actually walk you through the controls you should have in place, but some companies don't really need that. So working with a partner, so again, like you look like an MSSP or something that you say, hey, look, I don't want to hire 10 security guys, but I need to be secure. They can actually, again, walk you through what those processes are and say, here's kind of the things that you need to have in place. But the cost should also match the risk, right? You don't spend $1 billion to protect $100,000 of risk. It just doesn't make sense. So making sure you get those right as well, I think, is an important part of that process.
Anyone else?
Yeah, depending on like organization size, I would say it's a standard practice. As Rob mentioned, like you need to go do all these things. You need to assess like, okay, what is the return on investment kind of like approach, like how much you're going to get in return of like basically on the investment that you're making. The other thing is, all the companies now are like, I guess, moving towards the mindset of security by design. And that is basically the, I guess, best way out. It's going to take time for sure. But the thing is, security as an afterthought, like, hey, you have already put in place a system and you want to secure it now. If the basic foundation of the entire system is weak, you can do like so much. You can achieve only up to a certain point. You cannot go and design a really strong and like foolproof kind of system. There's no foolproof system, but still like basically if the foundation is weak, you cannot fix it. Example I can give you is a car, like it has a CAN bus. Some of you guys probably are familiar with that fact. CAN bus was designed for the vehicle that was accessed with physical key. Okay, and that is the legacy system that is still there. And now cars are accessible via internet, via your cell phone. Now you are open a floodgate of basically access points to the vehicle. And CAN is by design insecure. You cannot put in place security on CAN, no matter what you do. Okay, it doesn't have that option even available. Okay, so now if you want to design a foolproof system, like you want to make the vehicle really super secure, on the top of CAN, which is weak foundation, you can like achieve only to a certain point. We have developed some solution that we claim they are pretty solid, but I mean, if I go on the other side of the like fence and become a hacker, attacker or something like that, I know how I can get around those systems. So those kind of things, like basically we need to understand what kind of system we have and how much we can gain on that. And if like few things have or something have to change, then be it. Yeah.
I think so we talked this morning about resiliency and operational resiliency, and I think when you look at that worst case scenario from a cyber attack standpoint, I'm going to come at it from what does your reputational resiliency look like? And so that, again, worst case scenario, where do we begin? And another speaker this morning talked about kind of that cross section of talent working your worst case scenario plan. I think that even though we're talking about cyber attacks and data, it's really important that an organization bring in a cross section of leadership and people throughout the organization to think about those kind of communication and reputation impacts. So beyond just IT, somebody on the HR side really needs to be involved. And then those kind of frontline communicators, whether it's kind of traditional crisis communications or whatever the crisis is, I think a lot of times those people who answer the phones or your security guy, at the gate out in front of your operation are often overlooked in terms of them being prepared. Because oftentimes they're the one who get the call or a news truck or an angry consumer shows up, and so making sure that they're part of the mix early on and not an afterthought is really important.
What are the vulnerabilities in terms of the spots in cybersecurity for a typical small company? I mean, you worked in big companies, but you're kind of helping small companies in addition to what you're doing there. Where do you see the vulnerabilities for more small, medium-sized businesses in this realm, things they should be paying attention to?
Yep, I think, and it doesn't necessarily always apply to small companies, but larger companies have things like red teams that can do some testing.
Right.
So with security in smaller companies, there's this assumption of security, right? You just assume you're secure, and the way that happens a lot is I go out, I buy my anti-malware, right, and I put it on my laptops, and then I go get my firewall, and I go, cool, that's in, I'm secure because it's like a checklist, right? I did those things. But if you look at any other process, like application development, right? If I make some code, I'm going to test that code before then I release it to the public because I want to know that it works. So you almost need that same thing with security, and today that mindset just doesn't seem to exist. There's this assumption of security. So in small businesses, I think that's where it's the most prevalent because they don't typically have the staffing to do that. So making sure that you not only have that, and there's free tools out there, like if you want to know how would I do against ransomware, you can go download this simulator called RanSim, and you run it on one of your machines, don't have it on your network, and it'll tell you like how did it do, and it actually scores it. And we would choose our endpoint security based on those measures to make sure it protects based on me. And security is not one size fits all. That's the other thing. What you do in a small and a medium and a large are going to be totally different. And even between the different large companies are going to be different. So it has to fit within that organization. And the testing kind of validates that what I think is what I have is actually what I have.
Again, when you have a small business owner, maybe someone's even a restaurant owner, someone who just has a couple of employees, you're talking a language that they don't talk about, what they need to be looking for. So even breaking it down maybe even a little bit, further down here to more basic, what would be the 1 or 2 points you would give to that entrepreneur or small business person who doesn't have access to knowledge that you're speaking of here?
Yep, so I would say just make sure you only have access to the things you need to access. So don't open the internet up to everything in the world. Make sure there's easy things like geo-blocking so that China can't get to me just ever, right? Just turn that off. So just make sure that everyone only has the access they need, and then prepare for that worst case scenario, which is again that response if there is an issue.
The other thing we've talked about in this panel and the other panel was the role of employees in a company here, and that's a whole nother thing with watches, with access to email, other stuff. I mean, the way that people have access to information, particularly your employees, that's another potential danger element, maybe not deliberately, but sublime sort of thing here. Anything to say about that?
Well, I'm sure we've all seen it in this room, but even just as simple as like a hacker, looking at my LinkedIn and seeing my name or my CEO's, and then kind of looking at the most recently hired person, and just this fall, I think one of our young coordinators, pretty early in on the job, got a call. It's like, or an email, this is the CEO, can you go and we train. So it's, she knew. But, 3 or 4 years ago, we may have been more vulnerable to something like that. So, even not quite as sophisticated, but actually quite sophisticated on, on the other end, right? So I think it's just that training. And I think Kent said this morning, where you have people, you have crisis. And in the same way, it's like you have employees, if you have 1, 2, or 100,000, like those are your vulnerable points.
It wasn't Matt Friedman pretending to be your CEO, was it?
Not this time.
Not this time, all right. I always get all the points. So how do you see, looking at businesses and corporations, the vulnerabilities here? What's your take? I know you truly understand this at a very high level and way down. But just overall, what's your quick synopsis of how do you think most companies are prepared in this arena of cyber attacks and putting in security measures appropriate?
My understanding is like big companies, I'm located in Southeast Michigan, in the Detroit area. So over here, auto suppliers, OEMs, etc., they are way more or very well prepared compared to just few years ago to cyber threats and all those kind of things, because they are mindful of the fact that where they are heading to. And a lot of the product that I'm involved in the development, they put real thoughts behind those things. So I'm not saying because I'm involved, because I'm developing those solutions. For example, one of the OEMs is basically working on the fact that what in future when the vehicle is basically getting into accident or something like that, okay, how can we verify that the data coming from the sensor is from our vehicle? Somebody is not tampering it with. Even it goes into the code. And they are truly trying to implement security by design. So the codes that they are developing now is basically properly pruned, properly basically analyzed on the basis of security. So small companies, very small companies, I guess they have this illusion of this basically security by perception, I bought a router or something like that, I'm secure. That is one of the things. And if we are looking at weak points, definitely employees are one of those weak points. Because the thing is, they are the reasonable entry point, through personal contacts or some other way. Some people try to deceive them. So that is basically definitely a weak point. So if we do like very basic, things right, okay, little bit common sense, a little bit like basic training about okay, how to basically put your password, etc. It's not like recommended to have the same password for almost everything. That's not a good thing.
It deviates a little bit from what we're talking about, but it's plays right in what you just see, Tina, and that is on with the social media. I don't want to say fake news, but you have disingenuous entities behind messages getting out, and that can affect your company as well here. But in this area of security, I mean, from your experience, what you're seeing, Rob, in some of this with social media, with maybe employees or whatever, is there more emphasis on this arena, on this area, do you think, of companies protecting themselves?
Protecting them from social media?
From social media, or people, again, trying to intrude this way by coming in the back door, or?
Yeah, so I haven't worked a ton on that. I know in the family of companies, we have teams that actually watch social media just to keep an eye on that kind of pulse, which I definitely think is important. Again, that's the reputational risk. As far as like InfoSec processes and things to protect social media, unless it's kind of keeping that account from being hacked or looking at multi-factor authentication and things like that, we don't work on it very much from an InfoSec side. But I understand the reputational risk, certainly.
Yeah. And I know, Malik, you work on the geopolitical on Facebook and with this sort of fake news. That's a whole other side, or maybe that's another session of the chamber, looking at politics in 2020, what's going to go on here. But as we're winding it down, does anyone in the room have any particular question that you would like to pose to the audience or the panel here? Yes. Oh, Dr. Redshoe.
If like Dropbox or Zoom or whatever, they say they're HIPAA compliant, does that provide more security for sure or not? I like the words, but does it help?
I would say it does. So one of the good things about software as a service, so especially as a small company, if I can just use Office 365 for my email, right, I don't have to host a server, I don't have to deal with any of that, that's fantastic. So when you look at AWS and Azure and some of those services, they do offer PCI, HIPAA compliant type solutions. If you can shift that liability, it kind of mitigates your risk and put that on them. As a small business, I mean, that's a huge win. So as long as, again, you're validating what their processes are, understand how they're doing it so that you're aware that it's not, they'll clearly define what your responsibilities are and what they're gonna do, and making sure that you're doing your responsibilities. But it's a great win for small businesses whenever you can move that. Even like VoIP as a cloud VoIP solutions, right? Move your phone system to the cloud. Just let it be taken care of. Then as a small business, I don't have to deal with it. And they have all the headaches of the infrastructure and the staffing and everything else.
As we're winding it down here, I know we talked about this whole topic and just kind of to follow up with the other panel here. I'm going to ask you to each make a comment, maybe summing up a point that you made here that you think is relevant, you would want people in the audience to know, or maybe raising another point about this whole issue of cybersecurity and solutions to try to avoid having a problem. If there was one point you want to reiterate here or say, what would that be, Tina?
Well, I'm going to go, I think, in the reverse, and just in terms of the communications aspect of it. I think that, let's assume there is a breach or there is that worst case scenario, communicating. The example that you talked about, Rob, the Blue Cross, I think the third party in that case Wolverine sent out a letter, like a physical letter to the people, to their members. And I think you have to think about how do people communicate today and reach them in a variety of ways. I think that they probably could have done better in terms of the communication. And people just want to know that it's being handled. So I think assuming that worst case scenario happens, just being prepared and communicating kind of early and often.
And real quickly, Rob.
So I guess I'll continue down that path. I mean, for the family of companies, our culture is kind of everything, and one of our isms that we call the different types of cultures that we live by is do the right thing. So again, making sure you're prepared, doing what's best for your customer, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to really matter. That's what everyone's going to report on. So that's the most important. And again, my biggest, I guess, to go back to something I said earlier, is just don't assume security. I think that's one of the biggest issues people have, is assuming that the few things they did, they checked the boxes, they're good to go. That's going to really set you up for failure.
And Malik, you get the last word quickly?
Yeah, I agree with Rob. Security by perception is not security. So basically, whenever you're designing something, make sure like ask somebody to take a look at it. Like there might be something that you probably overlooked. So like there's nothing wrong basically asking somebody, even like some of the people working in that space. That's like a very good thing. And also like small companies, I don't know, I mean truly what is the cost of two-factor authentication in some of these things. Two-factor authentication is like not an easy solution, but it does provide security. I mean, I'm like University of Michigan, for their all the faculty and students, for all the system that they have now in the university, they have two-factor authentication. Okay, I have my personal phone. Okay, I pay my own bill. University doesn't pay for it, but I still like basically have to use two-factor authentication because it does provide some level of security. Okay, and it basically takes off some of the possibility of hacking and all those kind of things. Okay.
And there's so much more to say about it, but unfortunately, we are out of time, so I want to thank our panel for sharing some incredible insights and suggestions into all of this. And we can't really leave for a few more minutes. If anyone does have sidebar questions, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer it. And I want to thank you guys. Interesting morning. Thanks for coming out in the midst of Michigan's winter wonderland. It's a pure Michigan time of year, and I hope everyone has safe travels back to your office. Thanks again.